Hello, my name is Doremus Scudder and I'm a photographer. I've been photographing for more than 40 years. I started out with a regular 35mm film camera like most people did back then. Quickly moved to black and white, and then because I was interested in quality and more perspective control, moved on through larger and larger camera formats until I finally settled on 4x5. So what I've been photographing with for the last 30 plus years is a large format film camera. It takes negatives 4x5 inches large. It's one of those old-fashioned cameras that everybody sees in the old movies where you go underneath the focusing cloth to view the viewing screen, where the image is upside down and backwards. It's a slow working method, not picture, but it takes 15-20 minutes to set up the camera and focus, get everything set up, and make the exposure. I'm still what I call a photographosaurus, meaning I still work with film and I make prints in the darkroom. So nothing whatsoever I do is digital, except what I do to kind of get my images on my website. And I've been doing that, large format, black and white, and for the last 30 years in Europe, in the United States. I have bodies of work from Death Valley, California, from the Pacific Coast. I love to photograph in the Southwest and the Great Basin area, the desert, and Alaska, and of course my hometown, where I lived for 30 years, of Vienna, Austria, and places in Italy that I visited a lot. So that's about my background as a photographer. So the current exhibition that I have up right here at the New Zone Gallery is entitled Vienna Behind the Facade, a tribute to my erstwhile hometown. I lived in Vienna for 30 years. I moved there in the 1980s to study music, but I've always photographed alongside my music career. And every moment I had when I wasn't doing something else, I would pack my 4x5 camera on my back, hop on my bicycle, strap the tripod on that, and go looking for photographs. Now, Vienna is a very well-known tourist town, and the inner districts are very well-groomed, maybe even touristy, people might say. But if you get outside of these areas, you find very interesting sights. So Vienna is still today recovering from the ravages of the Second World War. And there are many places where you find architecture and scenes, shops, storefronts that are still from the 19th and the 20th century, from the time between the First and Second World War. And I find all that very fascinating, especially the juxtaposition of the old and the new. You get a glimpse into the lifestyle of the people that lived at that time. And so what I'm doing with my photography is telling these stories, the story of the people who you never see in my photographs, but are there nonetheless through their work and their architecture and the way they lived, juxtaposed with the modern layers that get painted over this, or the patina of time. Sometimes things are just in not good repair because they've just been left sitting for a century. So this is what I was fascinated with. So none of the tourist stuff, but what I say behind the facade, and I would look for these instances of past opulence. I call them ghosts from the past. And I have hundreds and hundreds of these photographs from my 30 plus years there. I've picked out 14 for this particular show. This particular image is entitled Graffiti Nude. This is from the 2nd District of Vienna, which used to be the old Jewish quarter pre-World War II. It's still home to a lot of Jewish people there, but in the 19th century and the 20th century, before the Second World War, it was a very wealthy district of town. Today, it's rather run down, but you can see traces of this old opulence still. So here is a building facade with a beautiful Art Deco sculpture, but it's in a rather seedy part of town now, covered with graffiti and this and that and the other. So the juxtaposition between the modern and that old remnant from the middle 20th century is part of what fascinates me. Another thing that I try to do with my photographs is not just have them work with content, but also with composition. When I first moved to Europe as a landscape photographer here in the United States beforehand, I had to come to grips with right angles and squares and windows and doors and buildings, all these things like that. And so I studied the work of Mondrian and other abstract artists to get a grip on how to organize pictures effectively. So what I try to do partly is to organize these triangles, these rectangles, these elements, different elements of the scene, so that the proportions are pleasing, lead the eye to where I want it to go, and help me tell the story that I'm trying to tell. This particular image is of a flak tower that was built in the Second World War. It now stands in the middle of a large public park. These were anti-aircraft gun emplacements for the Germans from the Second World War, and they doubled also as bomb shelters for the populace during the war. They are monstrously huge, stories and stories tall. You can tell from the trees in the picture, which are full grown, how big this thing is. They are made of reinforced concrete, and they're simply too sturdy and too giant to tear down, so they are still there. I find it an interesting anachronism in a modern city inside of a beautiful public park with all this lovely foliage to see this kind of piece of history that points to a darker past. This photograph I call Lion and Window. It was taken in the inner city of Vienna, inside of the Hofburg, which is the former imperial palace that's in the middle of the city of Vienna. This was outside what used to be, translating from the German here, the Palmenhaus, which was a housing greenhouse for botanical gardens. It had been unused for the better part of a century when I took this picture, and it had become overgrown and a little bit run down. But I love these old leftovers, remnants from the imperial time that you can see still today. This particular place has since been renovated. I think it's now kind of an upscale cafe and restaurant. But the lion is still there. He's just been cleaned up a bit. But for me, the overgrowth, this patina of time that I call it, plus the wonderful arrangement of windows and rectangles and different tonalities and all of that is what fascinated me. This is another image that I made in the second district of Vienna, which was the former Jewish district of town pre-World War II. This is a storefront, a facade, that has remained largely unchanged since before the Second World War. I find that part of it interesting, telling that story of what happened and how long this has been sitting kind of unattended because the owners were driven away in the 1930s. Also, I just loved the shaft of light, this bunch of different windows and rectangles, making that just interesting, fascinating to me composition. While I was working on this, and I mentioned before I work with a big camera and I have to go under the cloth to focus, and so I'm working away, focusing and adjusting my camera when I hear someone walk up and stop next to me. It's not uncommon, my camera's not very usual, so people often want to ask questions, but when I came out from under the dark cloth, there was a Hasidic Jew. So there are lots of Hasidic Jews in this district of Vienna. But this man in complete regalia, it had been the Sabbath, and he was dressed up with his fur hat and everything else. And he asked me in German, he said, what do you find so interesting about this? Was finden Sie so interessant daran? And I explained about the old storefront and the lighting and the composition. And he told me again in German, he said, well, I'm the owner of this building. And I said, great, I love to talk to owners of the building. I offered to send him a print and gave him my card. And he took a look at the card, which had my name and my address in Austria, but also my address in the United States on my business card. And he said in German still, Sie sind Amerikaner, you're an American? And I said, yes. And he said, oh, I'm from New York. My name is Irving Freund. And gave me his hand, and we struck up a little conversation there. His family had been driven out in the 1930s, and this house had been recently restored to him. Okay, again, the name of this show is Vienna Behind the Facade, and it's a look at non-touristy parts of my hometown for 30 years, Vienna, Austria. Things that are kind of behind the scenes and not the normal touristy things. So this is in the Spotlighted Artist section of New Zone Gallery. I'm the Spotlighted Artist for December, so this show will be up through the 26th of December. I'm hoping you can all get in and take a look at it. I've been a member of the New Zone Gallery, this collective gallery of artists, for about 2.5 years now. When I moved back from Vienna in 2019 and took up residence here in Eugene, New Zone was one of the first places I went to, and after submitting work to a Zone for All show, I was invited to join. So I've been here for 2.5 years. I usually always have 3 or 4 pieces up somewhere in the show, whenever it is, whenever we have those. And I'm very happy to be Spotlighted Artist with these 14 pieces.